You're in some country like Yemen or Libya where every foreign fighter wants to kill you. Sometimes you only have a pistol. And that's it, maybe. Trying to find some of the world's most wanted men. Like, how do you live in those environments?
Some of the stuff you had to do to become a Green Beret, marches where you're punching yourself in the face to keep going, burning 5,000 calories per day, and barely eating for months.
This hostage rescue that we did was the Syrian rebels, they wanted to use them as ransom, and if their needs are not met by midnight, they were going to behead them. So before they can even process, it's already done. We could take a room within 15 seconds and eliminate the threat. When they see Americans coming with our American flags on our chest, you can see it in their face. They know what it means. By the end of my career, and I was a drug addict, I started understanding how we hold trauma and energy for years. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was arming myself with intelligence. I started to get smart about mental health. At one point, I was ready to bring the fight.
You got quite a story, and I love profiling, if I can say, immigrants who have achieved high levels of success, because I really think it highlights great things about America, things that we should all be proud of about America. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Tell me a little bit how you grew up, because I think it was quite different from your life now and from people who were born in the United States. It seems like you had a different kind of beginning.
Yeah, I had a rough beginning, and, like you said, it's the true American story. And I wanted to cultivate that way. My grandfather walked out of the tyranny of communist China when he was 12 years old in 1940. And when he walked out, if he would have got caught, he would have been sent back to the labor camps where he eventually died. He swam to a piece of driftwood, and he asked God, wherever that takes him, that's where he'll settle. And he drifted into Vietnam. And a family took him in and raised him, and found that my grandfather was a hardworking young boy, raised him to be a man. And back then in Vietnam, you had to listen to the parents. It was arranged marriages. Mm-hmm. So the parents offered my grandfather their only daughter.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, he ended up having 9 kids. And, my father was the oldest out of the 9 kids. I was born in at a very delicate state in the Vietnam War. American troops have left Vietnam during that time. I was born December 17th, 1974. So at that stage of the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese, the communist regime, has surrounded the city of Saigon, and they were shooting artillery into the city of Saigon for the last final charge. I was born in that morning to artillery fire, to war. We, eventually lost our freedoms to the North Vietnamese communist regime, and we lived in the communist regime until eventually we escaped Vietnam by a fishing boat, which my grandfather, who walked out of communist China, funded that escape.
Yeah, I definitely want to get that whole story. I'm curious though, and I don't know if I'm going backwards too far here, but we'll try it. Why did your grandfather suddenly decide to leave China? And that just seems. How old was he? Because it seems strange that a kid would be sort of switched on enough to be like, well, this country's going nowhere, but still be young enough to need to be raised by people when he got to Vietnam. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Any research on China, communist China, during the early 90s, it was slavery. It was a lot of oppression. People were starving and dying. So, I'm pretty sure my grandfather felt the oppression from starvation and, the hard labors and everything else.
What happened to his parents?
I don't know.
Oh.
And Jordan, I want to say this, with my grandfather's side of the family, after I wrote my book, I was reunited with that side of the family. So I was just reunited recently because, when my parents divorced, I wasn't allowed to speak to that side of the family.
Oh, okay. Oh, is that just like a tradition thing? Is that?
I think that's American divorce, a westernized divorce thing.
Oh, so it's drama, just okay.
Yeah.
Old-fashioned drama. I was like, oh, this is an unwritten rule. No, it's just drama. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you wrote that you were born on a cement floor with bombs dropping, and you paint a really detailed picture. Kids screaming as parents were murdered around them. I mean, this is like soldiers in the city kind of situation, right?
It was the last push, right, since the American soldiers left Vietnam, right? So the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese were in their last final fight. The North Vietnamese were now invading the city of Saigon. So a few months after my birth, that's when the city of Saigon fell, which we lost our freedoms. When I say that we were born in the basement, if they're shooting artillery fire, in the city, into the city of Saigon, you're going to look for the lowest areas with the most secure areas, and that was the basement for my family.
Yeah, the soldiers are just overrunning the town at this point. Are they barging into houses? Paint this picture for us, for people who don't really understand this.
Okay, so a lot of my storyline was from my parents and also history. So if you look at history and you read news clippings, then this confirms the story. After the fall of South Vietnam, the North Vietnamese came in and they put any Vietnamese that served alongside Americans were immediately put into the re-education camps. Any people who held position of political power or opposed the new communist regime were immediately executed. A lot of these executions were done in public during that initial invasion, into South Vietnam. After that initial invasion, then it's the oppression years. So the oppression years is you're going to pay your taxes, and it's really high taxes. Right. And then second, they're going to oppress you with curfews and what you can do in businesses and in the government. So with my parents, my mother, she worked in like a soup, making Vietnamese soup. And what she told me was the North Vietnamese will come in and they'll demand money. First, the taxes, but then the North Vietnamese soldiers would then, off of their position of power, would barge into their homes, ask for money, loot. There has been rape. There has been murdered. So all this information, like I said, could be found in news clippings and personal accounts from other Vietnamese refugees.
When I went there, when I was like 20, I remember going on tours and stuff, and the tour guides would tell us how much they hated the United States, but they also said, by the way, I also hate the North Vietnamese just as much, if not more. And I would say, oh, that's, why? And one of the tour guides who took us to those tunnels, he was saying, well, the United States screwed up our country, but the North Vietnamese killed my whole family. I'm the only one left. I grew up on the streets. Now I give tours. And he said, and the Americans are pretty nice when they come on the tours. So I don't know who he was pretty like, he couldn't decide who he hated more, I guess. It was kind of a coin toss. And he told me some pretty horrible stories because the North Vietnamese version is we liberated South Vietnam from whatever, and the South Vietnamese story is they ruined our lives and killed everybody they could, and kidnapped my sister and my mom and never saw them again. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends who you ask.
Right.
My parents, and and my side of the family, they're all appreciative of Americans. So it's who you ask.
So are you part Chinese then, I guess? Your grandfather was Chinese, I guess, right? So is that a common situation in Vietnam? Or is it just, your unique blend you got going?
No. In Vietnam, it's a high Chinese influence. Think about where the terrain is and the borders and history.
Tell me about escaping Vietnam. I know a lot of people tried to escape. So a lot of people were successful, of course, like yourself. How does that work?
Escaping Vietnam was very difficult. Some walked out to neighboring countries. And when I say walked out, these jungles are riddled with landmines where Americans have dropped landmines through rice paddies and jungle floors. So some of these jungle areas are riddled with landmines. Also, the North Vietnamese would patrol these areas for fleeing, Vietnamese. Any Vietnamese that were caught were immediately brought out to the re-education camps. These are labor camps where they would eventually die. Some escaped during the evacuation when Americans left. They got on government planes. I want you to think about modern day, like we saw in the news, the Afghanistan withdrawal. I want you to kind of think about that because the news compared the Afghanistan withdrawal to the Vietnam withdrawal, how Americans withdrew from Vietnam. So very desperate situation. As for me, we escaped on a boat. Now, in history, there's over 400,000 refugees died at sea. First, from the piracy from surrounding countries. These criminals would forcibly stop the boats. They would board the boats, kill the men, rape the women, enslave the children. It was very lucrative. It was very easy. Refugees were fleeing with everything they had on them. So the pirates, these criminals knew, and it was easy to stop. Like thousands of refugees were leaving at that time. So we had to pass the piracy. We had to pass, even escaping Vietnam. Trying to get out, trying to find a boat. Who would smuggle us out of the country, and then the typhoon. Strength of the tropical storm has claimed the lives of thousands, and people get lost at sea. For us, we made our way into Malaysia, which was a 2-day trip. I was 3 years old at this time. So we made our way into Malaysia, and I want to paint this picture like this wooden boat that we're on is a fishing boat. Maybe 60 people at the most.
Right, and it's supposed to hold like 5, right? Or something, say, or 10 people, something like
No,
that.
it's supposed to hold 60 people. That night it was holding 120 people.
Oh, I see. Wow. That was a big boat.
And they took the food, they took water off of it to stuff more people into these boats. So when we made our way into Malaysia and we were rejected, they were not accepting more refugees, and they stopped us by gunpoint. I think they had enough of refugees fleeing into the country. They boarded our boats, they roped us, they pulled us back out into the South China Sea, cut the line, they shot the motor, and they left us there to die. My mother, she said we drifted for nearly 30 days. When the supplies were taken off the boats, lack of food and water, it put us in a very desperate survival situation right off the bat. We are already 2 days into the journey, made into Malaysia. Now we roped back out to the South China Sea with no engine. So my mother said, people are dying. First dehydration, sickness, people turn on each other. They were fighting. The dead was thrown overboard. We drifted for nearly 30 days. And my mother said, she almost lost hope. Now, it was common practice amongst fleeing refugees to carry poison amongst them.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't want their children to die a miserable death. They didn't want their children to be sold into slavery if the boats were taken.
I see.
So this was the last attempt to give their children peace. So my mother held onto this poison. Like, can you imagine seeing your children dying at sea? People are getting thrown overboard. How long do you hold on? She held on for nearly 30 days.
How did you get water? How did they get water? From the rain?
Yeah, so the occasional tropical rain, they will put buckets out. They'll put buckets out on the top deck, and then they'll capture water any means possible. Plastic, ponchos, whatever they can get their hands on to capture water. My mother said that people did, drink their own urine.
Sure.
Yeah, it was survival. So she said that we caught up in a huge tropical storm, and it was a miracle that our boat didn't capsize. We were a small little fishing boat in the South China Sea. And these tropical storms are huge. It's massive waves.
And the U.S. Navy wasn't out there trying to find people who were escaping at all? Or is it just, it's a massive sea, so I don't even know what you could do, but what was the hope? Like we just land somewhere? What was the idea at that point?
If they drag you out in the middle of the sea, cut your line and shoot your motor, what is the idea?
Yeah.
It's to hold on as long as you can before death takes you.
Oh my God. This is horrible.
So where I'm at, when I said I'm painting the picture that my mother was holding on to hope when there was no hope.
Mm-hmm.
So we got caught up in a huge tropical storm. She said it was a miracle we didn't capsize. And then, somehow it ripped us out further into the South China Sea. So that rain, she said, it kind of blessed us. We had a few more days together before, is another survival situation with water. But then on the last 3 days after the storm, when the rainwater was gone, people were dying again and suffering from dehydration, she said that she saw a light came across the crevice of the boat because we were on the under deck of the boat. Now, I'll tell you, Jordan, I do have dreams of this. Even as an adult, sometimes when I was growing up as a child, I had a dream of there was a light shooting through a crevice of a boat. And my mother told me that light was a search light, right? It was a beacon from a Russian supply boat. Now, this Russian supply boat was leaving Vietnam, right? And I want to say this, man, because it was the Russian ideology is how I lost my freedom. That's why we were escaping, right?
Right.
But it was the same communist ideology or the same people. Man, they saved us. They saved us.
Humanity won that round, I guess.
I don't know if it's, the lands of, because we do have rules in warfare. We have to protect the civilians. There are rules in war. But I also have seen the other side, I've seen, certain countries turn a blind eye to, those laws. But the Russians, they picked us up. They brought us one by one onto their boat. They gave us medical attention. My mother said it took roughly 3 days, right, for them to give us medical aid. And then they put us back on the boats. The engines couldn't be fixed, so they roped us and then they pulled us into Indonesia, where my parents and I, we lived in the refugee camps for a year and a half before we were sponsored to get into America.
Wow. That must have been, refugee camps are no picnic, but it must have been paradise compared to being on that boat.
Well, if you say paradise, for me, I was a little boy.
I use the term loosely. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a few hundreds of thousands of refugees in a plot of land. So I want you to think about that.
Hundreds of thousands?
Yeah, of refugees.
Oh, my God.
And all this information, just YouTube it. You can YouTube it. You can do research on it. They'll show you videos of when National Geographic guys came over during post-Vietnam warriors, and you'll see those living conditions. And it was a grass hut in the middle of a jungle. And it's a plot of land, and it's up to you how to live. So when I say this, desperate survival situation, people were getting raped. They were getting murdered. Oh. Things were getting, stolen. It's survival.
I take my paradise comment back, obviously. That's horrible. So there was no, this is not like a well-run operation in Indonesia with the refugees. It sounds like a free-for-all. It sounds like Mad Max in the jungle.
I think there was order, because we made it out and, not everybody got murdered. I think there was some kind of order, but within the order, there is also criminal activities, right? So people were drug out to the jungles. If you were caught out in the jungles at night, you disappear.
Really?
So
so is it criminals getting you at night in the jungle?
If the criminals that were in Vietnam and they escaped and made it to the refugee camps, they're still criminals, right? So you're in a group of families. You're a group of, at that time could be millionaires in Vietnam, right? Very successful people is lumped up with criminals because they lost everything. You lost everything. You have no freedoms. You have no country. So you're roped in with the criminals and everybody else. So when I said that people are disappearing, if they see a young lady, trying to gather water in the jungles and they're criminals, they're going to do what criminals do.
Hey, today's episode is sponsored by Aura, and honestly, I could not think of a better time to talk about them. If you haven't heard, hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. I've personally dealt with data breaches before. It's a nightmare trying to clean all that stuff up. If you're not already protecting your personal info, this should be a massive wake-up call. We are all more vulnerable now than ever before. No joke, over 2.9 billion records were compromised from national public data. The stolen info? Full names, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, basically everything you don't want floating around out there because it'll get your identity stolen. And the kicker, the hackers released it for free online. Didn't even sell it. I've got to say, this really ticks me off. Having your personal data just given away like that is infuriating. I'm not too personally stressed about it because I use Aura. Aura's got my back. They alert me if my phone number, email, social security numbers found on the dark web. And they don't just alert me, they act fast if somebody's trying to access my credit or bank accounts. Plus, if the worst case scenario does happen, Aura's got up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. And that's not even the best part. Aura's packed with other features to keep you safe online, all in one easy-to-use app. You can check it out for yourself by heading on over to Aura.com/Jordan Harbinger. You'll get 14 days for free, more than enough time for Aura to see if any of your personal data has already been compromised. Look, national public data, they're not going to lift a finger to help any of us here. They're probably not even going to face any real consequences for the breach, which means it'll probably never even get fixed. So if you want to protect yourself and your family, go to Aura.com/Jordan Harbinger and get those 14 days for free. Take care of this stuff now. Seriously. How did you finance the escape? I mean, it must have been everybody trying to leave. Surely the people who were smuggling people out took a fee somehow.
So getting back to my grandfather who drifted on a piece of log, when my grandfather married my grandmother and had his 9 children, he became very successful. He was a hardworking man. He was a, very smart man. So he worked in textile, and he owned his own textile company, and he owned a chain of condos. So very wealthy man. When the communists came over, he became oppressed. They came and took everything he had. So he was poor like everybody else. But the one thing my grandfather had was this amazing aquarium. This beautiful aquarium that he would put in his living room. My mother would talk about it. All my cousins would talk about this beautiful aquarium with these exotic fish. And so many times the North Vietnamese soldiers would loot through his house, right? Trying to find gold, trying to find money, trying to find all this, but they always stop looking at this aquarium. And why I keep on saying the significance of this aquarium is because around the frame of that whole aquarium were lined with gold bars. He hid his gold in this, and when he ripped it apart, that's what he used to finance our escape. And it was 3 gold bars for a child and 5 gold bars. 5 gold bars for an adult.
Oh my God. And that's what you gave this. Wow, he thought that far ahead. This man is prepared.
I don't think he thought that far ahead. I think that he's just always a guy who thought contingency plans. Like right now, right? If we lose all of our banking system, some people are invested in gold, some people are invested in silver. So he invested in other means of wealth besides just money.
Keeping money in your aquarium is somehow the most. It's a very Asian thing to do. Have money stashed somewhere in your house in a weird place. It's just, I'm married to a woman whose family is from Taiwan and China, and I feel like there's always a story about, oh, they're moving, so they have to dig the backyard up because there's a box with his gold that they buried under the kids' playhouse, or something. And you're just like, are you kidding me? Yeah. It's 2024. You're doing digging in your backyard for gold.
Yeah. My mother always told me that too. She said, once you experience war and survival at that level, it changes you as a human being.
Yeah. I believe this. Did your grandfather just stay in Vietnam and pass away in Vietnam?
He was the last one to escape. So after all his children and all of us successfully escaped. So all his 9 children eventually escaped, right? Wow. So he sent the first 3, hopefully they made it, and then he sent the next ones, and then we were the last of all. My father, my biological father, was the oldest, and he was the last one out. When I said the last of the children, and then once my grandfather knew all his children made it, then he made the journey with his wife.
Wow. How did he get out? Because if it was Surely he didn't also go out on a boat and almost die. I mean, he was an old man.
Yeah. So when all his children made it to America,
Hmm.
they were able to get him a plane,
Oh,
and then
wow.
a plane ticket. So he flew to California.
So that that's an amazing story. It's a whole family of survivors. It must have been he must have been so worried about everybody. I can't even imagine. I have two kids. He had nine. I worry about them playing in the front yard because it's near the road. I worry about them playing in the backyard because I'm a parent. I worry about stuff. He had real worries, and he still provided for everybody. That's incredible. What an
So
amazing
Jordan,
guy.
and that's why I want to bring that question to you, man. So, you're a parent, you love your child. You just
Yeah.
said, so if you're on that boat and you're at day 28 and people are dying and
Yeah.
other children are dying and your children are full of ulcers because their body hasn't even moved, right? And they're stuck in the basement and they're starving and they're dying.
Hmm.
How much longer are you going to let them suffer?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
You see what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like, so I give it to my mother, man. Like she had the escape for us, poison, but she chose to hold on, and because she did, we survived.
Okay, so wow, this is so intense, man. Okay, so you get to the United States from this refugee camp. Is it because how does that work actually? Because I assume it's like, oh, these are Vietnamese people that escaped. It's kind of our fault that we didn't, pull through in the end. Let's let a certain number of these people come to the United States. I know I went to law school with some Vietnamese folks, and she would tell my friend Nan, she would say, "Oh, we're boat people," which I had not heard, which sounds kind of racist now that I think about it. But since she said it, I think it's okay.
That's actually an official name.
It is okay, okay. Because it sounds a little not non kosher in 2024. But yeah, she would say we're boat people, and she had a rough go of it too. I mean, there was stuff she wouldn't talk about from that experience.
So the refugee camps, how we got out of refugee camps, we were there for a year and a half, and other countries accepted us. Country of Canada, my mother told me New Zealand accepted us. There was Australia was another one accepted us, but my mother held on to America. And America, when we say this, America was hard to get in. It was a lot of rules, right? So the America was backlogged with refugee applicants and everything else. The only reason why we made it to America is because of my uncle. See, during the Vietnam War, my aunt, my mother's older sister met a Special Forces Green Beret officer. He was American. And he was Special Forces. He was fighting North Vietnamese, and his G base, a Special Forces camp, got overran by the North Vietnamese. He was stabbed by a bayonet in his back of his ribs, and all his whole team was wiped out, and he was left for dead. Somehow, he survived that attack. And then they evacuated him to the city of Saigon in the hospital where he recovered from his wounds, where he met my aunt. He made it back to America, married her, and then he's the one who sponsored the sponsorship. So that's how we made it to America.
Wow. Man, there's so many dice rolls and luck involved and circumstance involved in the fact that you are still sitting in front of me right now. I'm sure you think about that often.
Mm-hmm. So when we first made it to America, we ended up in California, and that's where my side of the Lamb side, right? My cousins are now my uncle settled. My mother and father went to Fayetteville, North Carolina. They moved on and went to the East Coast, so North Carolina. The reason why is because my mother wanted to be reunited with her sister, and since my uncle, the Special Forces American, that's the headquarters of the Special Forces Green Berets, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So that's how we ended up in Fayetteville, right outside of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the headquarters of Special Forces.
What was your life like living in the United States at that time?
When we first came to America, I didn't know any different, but I was segregated right away. Segregated as a child, like 6 years old, I was spit on by older adults. When I say that, you think about it, it's post-Vietnam War. A lot of these veterans that fought in the Vietnam War, now they're coming back to their home station, which is Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, around that area. A lot of military presence. Some of them, a lot of them were suffering from, mental health. And America didn't acknowledge mental health at that time. So they didn't have any programs for them. So we were scrutinized. We were called by many racist names. My parents, they had to start over. They couldn't speak the language, so they had to start all over again. And my father and mother, they couldn't hold a job. They couldn't speak the language. And it was racist times in America. So we didn't fit in, and we were very poor in the beginning. And eventually my parents divorced, and my mother got remarried to American Special Forces Green Beret. And that's how I got indoctrinated into a military life upbringing. And that's how I eventually, went into service.
It's crazy to me that the servicemen would be didn't servicemen work alongside Vietnamese troops? I mean, why would they? I guess I'm asking a stupid question. Racism is sort of inherently stupid. It just seems like they would have worked alongside those people, and so they would know better. But I guess racists aren't exactly. We can't really hold them to a high standard of intelligence most of the time. I
mean, countless case reports of Vietnam of American troops raping Vietnamese women, beating up Vietnamese men. Countless accounts of it. So when I say that, you serve, okay, so if an American goes and serves in Afghanistan and he's working around Afghanis, is he sympathetic to that race of people? It depends on your upbringing. It depends on your values, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Were you getting along at school? I mean, if the adults were racist, I'm guessing the kids weren't much better.
So in the 80s, war movies were really popular, especially Vietnam War movies. So a lot of like racist gestures, racist comments towards, in these movies, right? They're using racist names towards the Vietnamese, right? And the kids would watch these movies and they thought it was okay to call me all these sorts of racist names that I saw on the movies. Unfortunately, their parents supported them because they were racist too, So when up in my upbringing, I would say I faced racism daily. It was a daily thing for me. And plus, before my mother got remarried, we were poor. We were refugees, So my clothes, it smelled. I smelled, and I ate indigenous food, so I smelled compared to a Westerner, and I was beat up, I was segregated, and I was reminded every day of what they thought I was.
Man, I will say, I was reading this book, listening to it, and some of your stories are really horrible. I mean, there's, you end up tearing up at Chipotle. And by the way, if you buy the book, please use our show notes links. If you want to cry at Chipotle, use the links in the show notes. It helps support the show. But it's horrible thinking about a kid growing up like that, especially after everything that you went through. Your mom must have been working so hard to make a life for you guys in the United States. I cannot imagine going to Vietnam or China and being like, all right, I don't speak Vietnamese or Chinese, whatever. I got to figure out how to get a job. Where do I work? Oh, by the way, I got kids. I guess I got to send them to school. It's like she doesn't have time to worry about your personal life, if that makes sense, right? I don't even know if I would tell her at that point. Like, what's she going to do? Worry about one more thing? What's the point?
Yeah, that's the thing is, all my abuse, everything, that I had to endure, I held it in. What am I going to do? Ask my mother, who's already dealing with everything. She lost everything.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of empathy for my mother.
Did you get the idea? How did you get the idea to join the military? It seems like almost like that would be the opposite thing. If everyone's treating you like crap, why serve the country?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you get that idea?
So I want to put this. So my brother and I were raised in the same upbringing, right? Strict military upbringing. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, made our bed. We had physical training in the morning. We had inspections. I mean, it was a military upbringing, truly.
Okay.
So my brother eventually became a doctor. Okay. The reason why I chose the military is because my mother had me go out to these and visit these refugees, right? So we would load up the car and she'll cook for them and we'll drive hours, man, to deliver these things to these refugees. We used to be those refugees, so I get it, right? But when I became a teenager, I just didn't care to spend my whole day with a bunch of refugees. But during the process of going every weekend to give, and help the refugees out, I realized that that's where I came from. I came from oppression. I came from the oppressed. I was born out of insurgency. The special forces, their motto is de oppressa libere, to free the oppressed. Translated in Latin, it means from oppressed man to free man. I knew this at a young age because my stepfather was special forces. My uncle was special forces. The neighbors around me were special forces. So I knew the special forces mission was to go back at these third world countries and to fight for the oppressed. And these warriors had some skill. So back when I was a teenager, all I wanted to be was a ninja, right? So back then, the ninja kick, the samurai kick was huge, right? In the 80s, it was huge. My father's last departing gift to me at 7 years old, where my mother eventually gave to me because I couldn't speak to my father, were 4 VHS tapes, and they were written in Vietnamese. And I randomly picked out a VHS tape, and I threw it in the VCR. It was The Art of Budo, to be samurai, the code, the ethics of Bushido. I first saw that when I was 9 years old, the Bushido code, and it changed my life forever. The warrior. Maybe Jordan, maybe I could say maybe I was holding on to the last memory of my father, but I was surrounded by warriors, special forces. So I knew at a young age that, going to these refugees and helping them and realizing the oppressed and where I came from, I realized, man, if I became this warrior, I could go back to those countries. I could fight for those people. And serving the refugees, I realized that at a young age. So at 13, I knew I was going to be a Green Beret. So 16 years old, I started my training, more cardiovascular training. I utilized sports to build agility and training. I was into martial arts by that time. I was reading Lao Tzu and Taoism. I was very roped into philosophy and Sun Tzu, the art of war. So a lot of that, a lot of studying that when I was in high school. In fact, my high school thesis was on The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And then 18, I joined the Army. I started off with the 82nd Airborne as a paratrooper. Then I went to the long-range amphibious reconnaissance teams, tried out for the Special Forces, and at 21 years old, I was in Okinawa, Japan as a Special Forces Green Beret.
Jeez, man. Some of the stuff you had to do to become a Green Beret, or you talked about Ranger training, actually. Marches where you're punching yourself in the face to keep going, burning 5,000 calories per day and barely eating for months, which, by the way, that is so bad for your body. But I guess that's not the point, right? They figure they'll rebuild that later. They're trying to test your mind.
That's right.
Is that the idea?
Yes. Yeah, so Ranger School is about leadership, and they want to see your leadership capabilities on conducting these type of raids, ambushes, these tactics in that type of adverse environment. They want to see your leadership skill while being deprived of sleep and food.
Is that because, and this is probably a stupid question, but that's because you are going to be under so much stress that usually all that stuff breaks down? Is that the idea?
Yeah, in war, in combat, you're going to have to deal with a lot of physical stress, mental stress, and you're going to have to perform, and especially special operation, you have to perform at that national level, even though you're dealing with these stresses.
I saw that you wrote in the book that lots of combat tactics come from Native Americans. I actually did not know that. Let's talk about that a little bit. I think that's interesting. Native Americans don't get enough screen time, so to speak. So I'm curious where those tactics come from. How did those even make their way into the military?
Yeah, so during the French and Indian War, when George Washington came over, when he was still a lieutenant with the British, he started seeing the tactics of the Native Americans. Native Americans would do more of hit and run tactics, while at that time the British would get on open fields and do volley of fire on each other, right? So Native Americans were more hunter-gatherers, hit and runs. If you think about okay, so then the Revolutionary War happened. It was because our abilities to wage unconventional warfare by using native tactics. So, by beating a superior military force, like the British was the most powerful military force of its time in the world. As Americans, we were just 13 colonies, rebels. We were not even a military force. How did we win against them? And we win against them because we use native tactics. Native tactics that we use during special operations is when to attack. So if I have an indigenous force that doesn't have night vision, when would I attack that enemy? The natives, they attacked, they attacked during the moments of darkness and light. When your eyes have developed, that ability to see into the darkness, but there's just enough illume on the breaking of the day that you know which buildings are what and where's the enemy's at. So when the enemy is opening their eyes, I don't know, at 4 o'clock in the morning when the sun's coming up, that's the best time to attack because you have surprise, speed, and violence. We learned that from the natives. We learn how to work in deep terrain. We learn hit and run operations. We learn ambushes. We learn how to patrol off of the native tactics. So if you want to see some of the tactics, look at that movie Last of Mohicans.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So those were the very first Rangers, right? Tactics that was indoctrinated into the military.
It's really incredible that they learned all of that. I mean, Native Americans it's a whole kind of amazing culture, and their combat tactics are second to none. It's really incredible. I didn't know that we adopted those into the military. I just remember reading about it as a kid and hearing about it as a kid. Your training in the military sounds quite unconventional. Aside from you punching yourself in the face to stay awake or whatever it was, you wrote about having, I'm gonna bungle this, but it was like an entire village somewhere where everybody spoke a foreign language. I assume, is this happening overseas in a friendly allied country, or are they actually like packing some sort of U.S. village with foreign language? How does it work?
Okay, so without going into too much classification with this, because
Sure.
this is Special Forces training,
Okay.
there is a town on the East Coast that the military pays to speak a foreign language, to act like a different country. So when the Special Forces students, right, go into their final phase of unconventional warfare phase, they have to parachute into this country and liberate this country from the oppressed. And there are crooked cops in there. There's rebels in this country, and they all speak different languages. So it kind of mimics, our operational environment.
And they just notify the whole town, like, hey, this week we're all foreigners and there's a hostile presence parachuting in, so have it. And what do they do? Fence the place in and say, like, this is the boundary of the. I mean, this is crazy. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they fence it in, but the boundary lines. There's borders and towns. We know where to go, and also, there's certain SEER school training, so escape evasion type of training. Where they treat you like a prisoner of war, and where you have to evade, and you're running across some of these towns. If these locals catch you, they're known to call in, who they need to call into special forces structures to locate you. Right. So all these locals are part of the game.
Are there kids in this town just going to school, living their life, and they see you crawling through the bushes and they're like, call in the special forces. It's one of the Americans or whatever. I mean, is that kind of how it works?
Yeah. There's kids in that town. It's a full-blown town.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's incredible. And the point is to what? Get to a specific objective, or you're just evading these people?
So if I was to ask you to go into a country and you have a crooked government and you have a band of rebels that are fighting for their freedom and their family, and you were to do this border crossing, link up with this indigenous force and overthrow this country, how would you do it?
Well, me as a podcaster, I would not be successful in this mission. I do not have the background on this. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
so,
guessing you walk through a swamp so you don't get caught, and then you look for the right pickup truck full of dudes. I have no clue, man.
yeah. I mean, it's bigger than that, right? So it's you. You're taking down the political government. You're
Yeah.
taking down the military force, the crooked law enforcement, right?
Oh
So you're
my
taking
god.
that all down, doing military hit and run tactics, propaganda. So you're engaging in all, intelligence gathering, direct action, to indigenous training, to force multiplying is all. It's part of the whole training.
Wow. How long are you in this town then doing this thing? This is not a 2 day thing. It sounds like a long, like an extended mission where they're observing you the whole time, I assume, or reporting on how you're doing.
Yeah, roughly around a month.
Wow. Wow. What an interesting setup that is.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I don't know how to transition to this next topic, so I'm just going to ask, how did you start doing underground fights for money in Okinawa? Because first of all, it sounds like you're probably not allowed to do that in the military, but I'm no expert as you know.
Mhm. So when I was stationed at Okinawa, Japan, I felt it was my destiny to be there, right? I am a samurai. No, so seriously, when I went to Japan, I wanted to learn Bushido. And I dove into Budo, Bushido, and it led me into Japanese jiu-jitsu, it led me in these formal fights. When I went there was a Marine base called Camp Foster, and the field house, it was a tough man match, right? And it's just big old gloves and, you're going at it. But during that time, the UFC was starting to get popular in 98. So you're starting to see that popularity flux over to Okinawa, but they were not. There was still a lot of striking going on, right? No ground fighting. Where I'm going with this is they had these Valley Tudo gloves. So it was no more boxing glove. It was the open hand gloves, right? So when I enter into the field house and you had to get a letter of approval from your commander, I'm on a Special Forces A team and I have a captain as my friend, right, that can approve that letter. So he approved the first one, the first fight I fought at the Marine Field House. It wasn't really a fight. Um, Maybe I landed a good blow on him, but a lot of the Marines, they were trained in this system called line fighting at that time. I was trained in ground fighting. So ground and pound, what you see in UFC, I was starting to get into that. And a lot of that knowledge hasn't fluxed over to Japan. So, my jiu-jitsu game was a lot better than them. And I won a lot of matches. How I started getting into the underground matches is because every week I would ask my captain to sign another letter of approval. Well, at that time, with the popularity of UFC, a lot of team guys, when I say team guys, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, they were getting banged up in these cage matches, right? Because they're trying to fight like UFC. So I knew like that my gig was up. At that point in the game, I met a fight promoter named Don Sato. And Sato owned a dojo in Naha, which is the capital of Okinawa. But he would set up fights, and there was a fight nights. There was a fight night across from Camp Foster, and I would fight at the Okinawan fight nights, and that's where I made my money. And because I fought the Okinawan fight nights, I wouldn't have to get approval from the commander. Now, I'll caveat that with that's a career ender,
Oh,
right? If I
is
get
it?
caught,
Yeah.
totally career ender. It's done. My whole career is over, right? So not a lot of people knew about that, and that's why I said it was an underground match. The only time that the command caught wind was my last fight, where they sent in a mainland guy from Japan to shut me down. Because I was winning these Okinawan matches and they didn't want a foreigner to win anymore. So they flew him in. It was Budokan fight night, and he shut me down. I would caveat that with we were doing a counter terrorist mission, right? And I just rotated back to the island after kicking indoors and shooting stuff in the jungles, and I was sick, but I still fought 3 days after I rotated back. And I tell you, man, but I would tell you, Jordan, his skills were so good, even in my best days, right? He was just a better fighter than me, right? That's what he dedicated his life to. But yeah, that was my underground matches, I did it on the side because I was just full of fire. I was full of hate, and I just didn't know why. I was always full of hate. Now I know why, right? But back then I felt like I had something to prove, man, in my 20s.
Well, I suppose a lot of us did, but we didn't necessarily run off and fight in underground fights. So why is it a career ender? Because it's against the military's rules to fight for money, or is it what exactly is the problem? I mean, it seems obvious that it should be a grave offense, but I'm just not 100% sure why.
Because a 2-star general of Special Operations Command put out a memo saying that no team guys would be engaging in any activity. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So it was expressly forbidden, not just generally sort of known that you shouldn't be fighting people for money. I guess it is a bad look, right? There's a special forces guy that goes around getting beat up or beating up other people. It's like when you win, you're an American special forces guy beating people up for money, and when you lose, you're an American special forces guy getting beat up. It's a bad look. It's bad for the brand either way.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you know what, man? I didn't fight just for that. I didn't fight for the money. I fought because I was a hateful person, and I was a damaged child, so, and I fought on the side. So when I say that is the team life alone, you're free falling, you're doing explosive breaching, you're doing close quarters training, you're shooting, your life is intense. And I was still bowing into the dojos at night to fight. Because, I felt like I had something to prove. But now I know, I just felt like I was chasing that fire, Eventually that fire came in war, so 9/11. So I had 3 years on the teams. When I say the teams, Special Forces A teams. I was deploying around the world. I was part of a counter-terrorist team, a company. When I say that is you're a crisis response force for the continent of Southeast Asia. Anything that happens in Southeast Asia, hostile related, you are pushed out. So I was at that stage, and then 9/11 happened. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. My wife and I were dating at that time. She was actually scheduled to fly to see me in Japan that day. She was trying to fly out on 9/11. And back then, it was no cell phones, right?
Right.
So lost communication with her for 24 hours. It was the worst time of my life. I love my wife, and she's everything to me. But back then, when we were dating, 9/11 happened, and that kind of changed the rest of my life. So I was 3 years on the A teams. I was about 7 years in the Army, and I fought the rest of my career after that. For the rest of my career, I fought wars. So, after 9/11, the Twin Towers went down. President Bush declared war on terrorism. The Special Forces divided into groups. Each group serves their individual areas. So like 5th group, they can go into the Middle East. 7th group is South and Central America. 1st group is Southeast Asia. You get it, right? Each group. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, so I was 1st group. I was any crisis in this continent, Southeast Asia. When President Bush declared war on terrorism, it was a global war. So my team, we pushed out into the southern Philippines, into the country of Basilan. Basilan Island, it was ran by half Catholics and half Muslims in that area.
Where is this again? What country is this in?
Southern Philippines.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I've never. Is this like where Abu Sayyaf is operating?
Absolutely, you nailed it.
Okay.
So that was our target, right? So Abu Sayyaf was who we're bringing the fight to. For the viewers, anybody don't know who Abu Sayyaf is, they're Al-Qaeda affiliated. They're part of a Muslim extremist group that want an independent Muslim state on the southern islands of the Philippines, and they're willing to do that by kidnappings, bombings, beheadings, raping, you know. So very violent group of people. We went down in the southern Philippines. We linked up with their LRC, so their tier one counter-terrorist unit that we stood up and trained. I personally stood up and trained with 2 years prior to 9/11. We were a part of that initial push into the Philippines to stand up their counter-terrorist capabilities because we knew the war was coming. Just because of terrorist activities, you know, the intel that we're starting to see develop into Southeast Asia. North Korea was a big push too, you know, with their no-dong missiles that can launch into and hit us in the United States with an unstable dictator at that time. So that was so those were the two primary. My team, we pushed into southern Philippines to combat Abu Sayyaf. I was there for on and off for roughly 3 years, in and out of the jungles of the Philippines, working with their host nation. If you guys don't know, the Burnhams, they were a missionary group. They were out in Ohio, and they were a missionary group working in the southern Philippines, and they were captured. They were kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf, brought into the jungles. For over a year, they were in the jungles, and America was trying to negotiate their release. We were working with the counterterrorists and Filipino host nation and President Royale at the time to go into the southern Philippines to help find, fix, and locate and rescue the Burnhams. Unfortunately, the Burnhams were, the Filipino foot patrol, just a normal, not special operations, a normal Filipino army was patrolling through the area, made contact, and Mr. Burnham got shot and he died, and Miss Burnham, she's back in the States. But I did 3 years there fighting. We lost a whole team there from a suicide bomber, a motorcycle bomb. We lost some teams from helicopter crashes on the Philippines. So we lost some teammates in the Philippines. I did 3 years there, and then I was offered a job by a tier one unit in the Army, which is the unit. And I was asked to go there and become their unit combatives instructor. Now, I want to say this because at that time, I was fighting in Japan on those underground matches, but when I would deploy in Malaysia or I'll go to Thailand to train with their commandos, I would fight Muay Thai matches. I'll fight in the jungles in Silat matches in Indonesia, so I was just that guy, I was a student to the martial arts. So I was learning, sticks and impact weapons, edge weapons and knives from the Filipinos when I was deployed there for 8 months in the jungles. And when I would go to Indonesia to train with their commandos, I was learning, knife fighting, Silat, so all these type of martial arts, it was like I was incorporating them all into my own technique, right? And at that time, I was fighting in Thailand, and there was a unit. When I say a unit, is their top tier counter-terrorist unit in the Army. He gave me basically a letter of acceptance. I applied for it. I tried out for their tryouts. I made it, and I ended up being the unit's hand-to-hand combat instructor. In between me teaching, I would rotate overseas, do combat rotations, and I would rotate around the United States and train with fighters like Horace Gracie. I trained, with Ensign Inouye in Hawaii. We're just going around the United States and training, bringing that knowledge back to the unit, deploying overseas, and doing combat rotations. After a year of that, I rotated out and I started doing special reconnaissance within the unit. Very high top secret at SCI level, but I could say, we were traveling around the world, in and outside of war zones, finding, fixing, and killing some of the world's most wanted men.
I know you can't talk about much of that, but I'm curious about the hostage rescue mission in Iraq with the foreign fighters. Can you talk about that?
So when I was in Iraq, so Syrian rebels, right? So after Saddam was captured and handed over to the Iraqi government, his two brother were killed. That handed over the government to this new government system that we're trying to work with, right, over in Iraq. But then there were Syrian rebels that started moving across the border and was led by Sarkawi, AMZ. He became the top. He became the number 2 most wanted man. Bin Laden at that time was the number 1 most wanted man. He was operating in Iraq, so he became our primary target. So we hunted down Sarkawi. Right. So with this hostage rescue that we did was these Syrian rebels captured local Iraqis, and they wanted to use them as ransom. And if their needs are not met by midnight, they were going to behead them on video, like they always do, right?
Right.
But at that time, our war capabilities were on point. Our intelligence were on point. We had host nation agents, Iraqi agents that we trained. We were working at that national level, and that came out. The terrorist organization made their threat. We triangulated where they're at based off on their technology. We were able to get bird's eye view, which is like a satellite view of the real time, and we knew where they were at. And we came in under the cover of darkness. We walked in 8 clicks so they don't hear our helicopters. We were working with the Rangers to contain and isolate, and we came in, killed the bad guys, and rescued hostages.
How many hostages were there?
If I can recall right, I have the picture, but I would say there was 8 hostages.
Okay. Man, they must have been glad to see you. Did they understand what's going? Like, what is that like? Do they understand what's going on?
Oh yeah, they understand. Anytime hostage rescue mission, when they see their oppressors dropping in front of them, and Americans coming to rescue them with our American flags on our chests, they know what it means. You can see it in their face.
Oh, man, is inspiring the word? I'm not sure. I feel that it's like you got this level of intensity, and I can put myself in this situation of a hostage just being like, it must be so cathartic to see somebody who has beaten you up, starved you, told you that they're going to kill you. God knows what else they've done to you or the people around you, and you just see their head explode like a watermelon, and somebody comes and grabs you up and says everything's fine now. It must just be the biggest relief in the world.
Yeah. Before they can even process, because our raids and our training, we're fast, we're good at what we do. And we've been doing it for a very long time. And, a raid can last 15 seconds. We could take a room within seconds, and eliminate the threat. So before they can even process, it's already done. And we're bagging them and we're moving them, we're extracting them out of the area, So it's very fast, it's very intense, But in the end journey, like you said, man, it's that emotion. You see it. It's that appreciation. And, like for me, me being who I came from, I was oppressed, right? I came from oppression. So me being who I came from, I could see the people and I could truly feel their pain, their oppression, because I've been there, and multiply that around the world. So it's not war zones, So in that hostage rescue mission, yeah, it was foreign fighters came in and they captured, local Iraqis, and they're trying to use them as ransom. After I did my war year, so at a certain point of the war, the high value individuals were not in war zones, the guys who were making the play, and we needed to kill those guys, and we needed to find, fix, and kill them, no matter where they're at in the world. So then, orders came down that a special capability was going to come out, and we were going to flux out of war zones and find, fix, and locate them wherever we're at in the world, and either kill or capture them. So that level of the game kind of changed everything, and I was part of that level. So it wasn't just the war zones for me; it was outside the war zones, and I want to tell you why the difference between the two and why it's so complex is that outside of the war zones, you don't have bird's eye view, you don't have satellite imagery, you don't have helicopters, you don't have bombs that you can drop, you don't have fast moving jets, you don't have any of that. Sometimes you only have a pistol, and that's it, maybe. And you're in some country like Yemen or Libya where every foreign fighter wants to kill you. And I'm a 205-pound Asian at the time, tattooed out, trying to find some of the world's most wanted men. Like, how do you live in those environments? And I lived in those, I live with the people, I live in those environments, 8 months at a shot sometimes, and I was living in and out of CIA safe houses. I would work out at embassies, and we would find them.
You must look like an alien to somebody from Yemen.
I do. Yeah.
Like they've probably seen a couple white people. They watch movies, but then you come in and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. Tattoos, an Asian guy, but he's also like a lethal weapon. Like, what cartoon did this guy? Like, what video game did this guy walk out of and into our village? Like, what is happening?
Call of Duty.
Yeah, literally. Yeah,
Literally.
we'll get to that.
No, but I want to talk about that because your posture is everything, right? Your posture is everything, and I can come across intimidating,
sure,
or I can be kind, right? And I can come across. So when we had to go through training, as some of our training was in DC, and I had to lower my posture. I can't come across like that commando, if I'm trying to work intelligence and work with locals, right? So your posture has to change, your background story has to change, who you are has to change, and all that, was a part of the plan, for us coming in.
You mentioned in the book that when you do raids like the hostage rescue mission, someone's job is to fingerprint the dead guys and scan their eyes. And that's fascinating. First of all, that's like straight out of an action movie. Somebody's job is to scan these guys' eyes if they still have them, find out who these people are. Is there like a big database with all the terrorists or something, or foreign fighter? I'm like, what is the data used for? Can I ask that? I don't even know if I can ask that.
No, I'll put it plain and simple. How do we know if we killed you or not? If there's a big database and, there's multiple war fronts going on. So wars, conflicts in Yemen, Libya, then you got Afghanistan, you have Iraq, then you got these places in Syria, all these places, and these terrorists are floating around everywhere. If you're hunting for this guy in Afghanistan and we killed him in Syria and there was no database, you're hunting down the same guy that we already killed years ago.
Got it.
Right. So, and then, word of mouth wasn't good enough, and picture is not good enough because sometimes they don't have a face.
Yeah.
Right. So we had to do biometrics on them, and then these biometric, machines came out. HRT, Hostage Rescue FBI, was a part of that initial process of logging that data and maintaining that database. Because at a certain point, how do we know who we're killing? Because we're working with different organics units too. There's SEAL Team 6, there's the unit, there's Green Berets, there's, there's all Rangers, there's all these other units. And how can you keep track of who you killed?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a guest from the unit. It's funny that you call it that too. I guess that's like was that like an army? I forget already. It's like an army unit that does intelligence and special operations, which it sounds like is every unit, but it doesn't have a public name, I guess. And he didn't mention this database, but we had a slightly different sort of topic of conversation. But he was also, now that I think about it, an immigrant from Egypt. And he had moved to the United States when he was like 20 and was like, I'm joining the military. Yeah, his name was Adam Gamal. Does that ring a bell? I mean, sure, it's his author, his pen name, episode 978 for people that are interested. Yeah, he moved here from Egypt and was just like, I want to do something for this place. It's an incredible story, much like yours. In the book, you mentioned you had this internal monster voice that puts doubt and self-worth issues into your mind. Tell me about that.
So, now that I work on myself and, I'm in this spiritual journey and healing, I just realized that, okay, so our subconscious, right, our program is from 0 to 7, right? Anybody in neuroscience, anybody in education and mental health will understand 0 to 7 is your program. So that's buried into your subconscious because your analytical and your conscious mind wasn't even developed until you're around 8 or 9. Well, from 0 to 7, it was war. I was born in a basement. My uncles were ripped apart from me and sent to re-education camps. I saw people, thrown overboard from dying in a refugee camp. So a lot of survival going on back here. A lot of survival. So when I was growing up, a lot of self-doubt. That's why I fought in Okinawa. I had so much self-doubt of who I was. I never fit in. I was rejected from in my childhood. I was spit on, pushed to the ground. I was told I was a dog because I smelled like an indigenous person. So what I'm saying is I never fit in. So I always had a lot of self-doubt. Even though I was a Green Beret, even though I fought, even though I was the top of my, the top tier of the Army, it was me. I oppressed myself. I had a lot of self-doubt, and I had to come to terms with that towards the end, after I got out of the military, because after I got out of the military, you're suffering from post-traumatic stress, right? You're combat. You see a lot of trauma. And for us back during my time, which is 2016 when I got out, mental health wasn't really recognized in the military. There was no program for it, right? And it was starting to surface with a lot of drug addictions that we saw, suicides from my peers, special operations, because they fought that really, they did a lot of the heavy lifting during the war. So we started seeing a lot of the traumas started surfacing, and it comes out and it plays out in, drugs, alcohol, womenizing, abusing yourself. So I saw the two sides, and I heard the voices inside my own head. So I knew the battle was real, And I want to say this, man, for the viewers, is it's not just voices, because the voices is attached to thoughts, right? And each thought is tied to an emotion. If you even think of a thought, it's tied to some kind of emotion or belief, right? If you tell me something that was painful that happened in your life, some emotion is there. So imagine subconsciously you have these negative thoughts just playing out in your mind 24/7. You have no control over it because that's your program. You can't control your subconscious. And 95% of your day, 95% of your life is ran off your subconscious. So how do you control something that you can't even reach? And I saw a lot of the veterans, they were losing this war. They were really losing it. And, at that point in my life, I was at 23 years in the Army, 15 years of war in 27 countries. And I was a drug addict. I was numbing all my emotions with painkillers. I caught an IED, a roadside bomb, in 2005 during the Iraq War, and it really tore my neck up, and they gave me a Percocet. And I tell you, man, I was immediately hooked, Jordan. Because, dude, up until then, it was like I just felt war, I felt regret, I felt hate, and anything, man, anything that could take me out of that, I used. And I used it, and I abused it, and by the time the end of my career, man, I was a drug addict and I was lost. I had no place, you know what I mean? Like no purpose. Like, where do you go? Like, if you had a career for 23 years and you had to reinvent yourself, there's a moment of death and rebirth somehow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I got out, I had to die to that guy, that warrior. I wouldn't say that warrior died. I had to die to that hate.
Mm-hmm.
that I use as a weapon. Because I did. I use hate as a weapon.
It sounds like this monster just built and built and built. What was going on? You said you'd already been dating your wife. Were you married by then?
Yeah, we're married for, we've been married, we're married for 23 years, and she dealt with my whole military career. My life is really secretive. Special operations is really secretive. She didn't know half of my career. I don't talk about my warriors to her, but now she's seen this guy that she used to see as this symbol of strength. Now he's not that. I wasn't that anymore. And it took a little bit for her to readjust, to give me that healing space that I needed, and she did. I want to also tell you, Jordan, at that same time, I was building a company. So I realized all my trauma, 0 to 7. I started realizing that, and then I started listening to podcasts. I started to get smart about mental health. I started understanding how trauma, how we hold trauma and energy, and I started studying it for years. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would run and listen to some podcasts between two doctors talking about neuroscience, and I did that for years. I was arming myself with intelligence, and then at one point I was ready to bring the fight, and that came in the form of meditation, spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
just being a better human.
Man, it must have been really hard on your wife. Although I do feel like Ruthie is low key, super tough, and probably tells you what's what behind the scenes.
Yes.
And I can tell from our communications that she's very switched on. My wife Jen said the same thing. Like, wow, she responds right away. She's like super on top of it. She's really, and so that must have been tough for her. But also, it must have felt when you were recovering. It must have felt pretty good because you definitely had an ally in her through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely had an ally, and she definitely gave me my space I needed. But it was also a journey for her, because at a certain point, my traumas were so severe that simple meditation was not going to get me there. I realized that. And at this point, I was cold plunging. I was meditation. I would do breathing control exercises. But man, that takes years to develop. Years, right? So then one of my friends, he was an ex-Navy SEAL. He went down to Mexico and he did psychedelics. And that's just telling you, that's a culture thing within special operations. A lot of us go to Mexico to heal in psychedelics because our trauma is just so severe, And so he went down to Mexico and he did Iboga, which Iboga is a root from the tree of knowledge from Africa. And they brought in healers from Africa, and then they brought them to Mexico. Doctors are here. You're hooked up to EKG. I mean, it's legit stuff, right? And you have to even like be vetted through this program, and the program is ran by this ex-SEAL Team 6 guy. So he's there to set up this program to heal guys at my level of trauma. So my friend, came back, and man, he changed, from that treatment. So that started my interest in psychedelics. So I would say about 2 years ago, I started my psychedelic journey. And each their own, man. Like some people they believe in it and some people don't. And I believe you have a right to believe in what you believe in, but each person has their own healing journey. And I tell you what psychedelics did for me, it allowed me to access a certain portion of my brain, my subconscious. It allowed me to go to my 3-year-old. I met my 3-year-old self. It allowed me to go to my 7-year-old self and heal that portion. Right. So I want to say, so I went down to Mexico and I took that, Iboga route. Right. And 15 hours I was under. man, it was the worst experience of my life. It was just a lot of anxieties, the darkness, the shadows. And I just, man, it was hard. It was very hard for me. And then the next day they had me smoke this 5 ml DMT, which is toad venom, right? It's one of the most poisonous venom in the world. What they find these toads in Arizona, these indigenous toads, and they'll piss the toad off and they'll shoot this poison to a piece of glass, and they'll dry the glass in the sun. They'll flake it into a crack pipe and you smoke it.
Oh my God.
It's called ego death.
Yeah.
And Jordan, you will know what it means to die. You will know. There's no doubt in my mind. DMT is only produced at this amount on a moment of birth and a moment of death, right? And your body inside is convinced, there's no doubt about it, you are dying in your mind. And when darkness engulfed me and my ego died, I shot through this light. And I just never felt love like that ever before. And I knew it was God. I never felt this sort of love from man, even my wife who loves me for everything she has, this forgiving, pure energy. And I knew it was God. And I tell you, it changed me, man. It really did. It changed me, and it made me want to be a better human being. It makes me value my words and what I say to our youth and what I say to the communities and my actions as a human being, right? So it really changed me. And, since after Mexico, I've been working on myself and, building the company. And I do sit with Wachuma, which is cactus, right? And it grounds me and it teaches me, right? So I sit with that, once a year.
What does that mean? Is sit with that? Like, is that you're ingesting a cactus, or am I missing the point?
Yeah. So when I sit is you have a shaman, right? You sit with a group, you open up that space. For us, we open up that space through sage, right? So we open up the space, we cleanse the space, we invite God, Jesus, love, and healing. And then I consumed a cactus, which is in a form of a tea, a brew, which they brew this cactus underneath a full moon, right? And I drink the cactus, and it's so bitter. What it does, that cactus, man, is really bitter, and it stirs up your stomach, and it brings up a lot of emotions that we trap within our lower abdominal region. And then with a Hindu long elongated breathing control technique, I'm able to find what we call the still point and release energy. So when I said I sit with cactus, it's I sit with the medicine for 12 hours.
It sounds like, I know back in the day, monks their job was to heal warriors when they came back from combat. I guess maybe I don't know if they had psychedelic plants in all of these kinds of rituals that they did, but it sounds kind of similar. It's like an ancient spiritual PTSD treatment that monks were in charge of. Does this ring any bells for you at all? Have you heard about this at all?
I would tell you this, no matter where I travel, the monks were drawn to warriors. No, they didn't ask to help us. They didn't even offer to help us. But if we asked, they're right there. Always monks and priests are drawn to warriors. Everywhere I go, from Europe all the way to Asia, Middle East, it's always the monks that are drawn to warriors. Even during my healing journey, the monks came out to help me, right? So, I became a face, right, in the veteran space. So I help a lot of veterans these days, and I go to these galas to educate other veterans, educate sponsors, and you see them there. Always, monks are right there. I feel that they understand. Maybe it's us that need more help, or maybe, but a monk has told me that it's the warrior that suffers the most for others. Killing is not Jordan, killing takes your soul, man. In war, you kill for what? You kill for the safety of our country, right? You're killing for the liberation of what we feel as good people, but it hurts your soul, right? So the warrior buries that burden because of our dharma in this lifetime. So the monks, I feel like they're drawn to heal us because they understand the dharma that we have to live in.
Do you think one of the reasons you joined the military was to prove to yourself, one, that you could, you mentioned liberating oppressed people, but also is there any sort of idea that you would prove to yourself or maybe even to others that you were just as American as some of the racist people that you came across or the people that didn't think you were going to make anything out of yourself? I mean, you almost did it to prove to the monster that it was wrong in a way. I don't know. Am I off here?
Yeah, I mean, no, you're not off. I had to prove myself to everybody because I never fit in. Even on the A teams, I don't fit in. Even now, I don't fit. So
why don't you fit in on the A teams? That part doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, well, I mean, on the A teams, you have different backgrounds to different people, and on a certain groups, I could tell you, I was one of the very few Asians.
Okay.
Asians
Sure.
Asians are not very populated within special operations. We make up 0.001% of special operations. So I guess a minority.
Sure.
They never treated me wrong. The team guys, I mean, they were my brothers, and they'll die for me. It's all here. It was me all along, because I never accepted myself. And that's why I always seek the approval from others.
Tell me about transitioning to Hollywood. I know when you left the teams, you just sort of threw your uniform off and let it sit in the corner for 6 months and then went to bed. I mean, that wasn't exactly a smooth transition. And now you find yourself in Hollywood. I mean, it seems like surely you did not see that coming. By the way, I think it's funny that of all the things that you've been through, that the tight clothes they made you wear in Hollywood got special mention in your book. Like you punching yourself in the face during a march. And can you believe they made me wear spandex? It's unbelievable.
Yes.
It's not right.
Well, so Hollywood didn't happen right away. It was 3 years,
Right.
3 years of me traveling around America. There was a certain stage, a certain point where I took the teachings of Bushido and the way of the warrior, and I wanted to be an instructor. So I started traveling around America. I started teaching from New York all the way to LA. I taught, and we were busy. I taught law-abiding citizens. I taught military, and I taught law enforcement. Now we're just booked with law enforcement training. They booked us out for years, literally. Our training is very popular. During that time, my wife was filming me teaching classes, right? And through my reconnaissance special forces background, I knew how to do post-editing and video editing and photography and all that. We had to learn all that. So I post-edit and I throw it on YouTube. And after 3 years of that, the History Channel talent team emailed us. I'm known for knife fighting. I'm known for, my knife fighting, my sticks and impact weapons because my time in the Philippines training with those guys. So they called us. They asked me if I would be interested. Ruthie thought it would be a great, change of pace for me in different scene. And yeah, so life is about trying new things. I tried out for it, and I found myself in Hollywood next to Bill Goldberg, co-hosting Forged in Fire, Knife or Death. It was crazy. We did it for 3 seasons. Man, people ask me, they're like, too, how was it like, being in Hollywood? man, it gave me anxieties, like, because everybody's up in your face,
Yeah.
putting makeup, like literally you put makeup in your face, they tell you how to dress,
Yeah.
right? Because, they know what sells. You're always, doing these offshoot locations where they're taking photos. It's just a lot of attention that I never received in special operations, right? Because everything's secret. So total, like if you pulled a fish out of water, you threw him on land, that's me flopping around. That's what I felt. I was hyperventilating. But man, it allowed me to understand that side of myself. And it had to calm the monster, right? So the monster was about survival. It was about war. It was about this. But then I was thrown in Hollywood and I had 15 cameras on me and I had to be this. Right. So, man, it really made me reevaluate that monster. Right. But man, it was a great experience. Right. And I did 3 years. Bill Goldberg and I are still friends to this day, and it opened up that doorway to me. So now I'm known in the knife world. We have our own line of knives and it's an amazing experience.
How did you end up in Call of Duty? This is, for someone like me, far more impressive than a TV show or any movie is Call of Duty. In fact, I think, isn't the video game industry bigger than the movie industry these days? It might even be bigger than the music and movie industry entirely. I'm not sure.
Combined.
Really?
Combined,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I'll say a number. It's more than that. It's just one of the franchise I work with. They just sold it to Microsoft when I was filming for Call of Duty Season 2, and they sold it for 39 billion.
Wow.
Right.
Just that
And
phrase.
that
So this is like being in a Marvel movie. It's but more. It's bigger than being in a Marvel movie.
because they capture my movements. Like okay, so the company Infinity Ward, they changed their name now, but Infinity Ward, they emailed us and then they wanted to capture my martial art movements, my knife and impact weapons specifically. They love my gunfighting skills, but they wanted more of my martial arts. Right. So they emailed us. They were interested. We were negotiating at that point. And then I was teaching out in San Francisco. I was teaching close quarters battle out in San Francisco with the San Francisco Police Department. And then they follow us on social media and they asked us to fly from there to Hollywood. So we did. We flew from San Francisco to Hollywood. I had guns all over. I had my kit on me. I had swords. I had all my stuff, right? And they flew us out and they introduced themselves. They took me around. Jordan, this place is more top secret than the unit. Like seriously, their
Really?
security level was impressive. Very impressive. And I worked at the top secret level, some of these, agencies in DC. I have seen some of their security protocol, and man, this is up there, right?
Really? Because it's like they're. I mean, I guess they're super concerned about any of this stuff leaking and whatever.
Hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
and it's so then I met the vice president. Uh, And him and I hit it off, man. We hit it off about, samurai and philosophy, life. And then he stopped me in the hallway and he asked me, how does he get me onto the game? And my wife said, what do you mean? You want Rōnin? And then he goes, yeah, I want Rōnin. How do I get him onto the game? And then that's when I would say 15 lawyers got involved and got our trademark, my looks, my tattoos. Like they stripped me down to my underwear and scanned me into the game. They scanned in all my movements, my speed. They scanned in my knife fighting. All my movements were captured, emotion captured. They
Wow.
scanned in my face. They had these dots on my face. So every expression, like this, they'll capture every movement.
Wow.
It's very impressive.
How do they do that with your face? Is it lasers or are they actually sticking things to your face?
So they had a makeup artist put these dots all over my face,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then the computer would scan it, and then they'll put these dots as emotion as movement points on
Right.
the computer. So
Okay.
as I move my face, you could see like that portion of the screen moving. You know what I
Wow.
mean?
Yeah, that's
With
cool.
expression. Yeah. So very latest in technology. I have never a lot of things I can't talk about just because letter of non-disclosure
Sure.
and the level of technology I saw.
Yeah. I mean,
They are the cutting edge.
that's
No
so
doubt.
that's amazing. I know even and if I think this is public because it's in the game, right? But your own weapons and your own gear that you design and all that stuff is in the game, along with you and your expressions and everything. I mean, that's in your swords and stuff like that. How do they do that? They just take photos and videos of you using it, and they paint dots on the guns and stuff like. I'm so curious how that works, or is that something you can't share?
No, I can share that. So, my guns and weapons and swords and knives were with me. So I gave it to them. They scanned it all in to the game. So basically, I have this scanner. They scanned it, right? So they literally have my watch. They have my bracelet,
Oh
right?
wow.
Like they scan everything into the game. And when I was doing motion capture, so the two washitashi swords, they were handmade by Kiku, who was from Japan, right? So those are my personal swords that were handmade in Japan for Rōnin and me. And they scanned those into the game. So when I was in motion capture, they had these PCC pipes. You know what I mean? Those
The
pipes.
like PVC, the white plastic kind of. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and they would tape and they had sensors on them, right? And those became my swords. So I would do the Kali stick movements, and then they had these blades that they'll put the sensors on, and they'll balance it so the blade moves, right, like a normal blade. So I would tape it so the balance of the blade would move like a normal blade,
Huh.
right? So I would do all my movements with a blade sword. I would draw the guns. I would show my foot movements in the house. How I would, sweep a room and they capture it all. And we worked with them on and off for about 2 years on development of Modern Warfare 2. And then season 2 is when I came on to the cover of Call of Duty, and they built me as a main character around the whole war zone. So they built the whole world around my character
Yeah.
in season 2.
I mean, that's like being Superman in a movie, right? It's just, it's really for people who don't play video games. It really is like, oh, we picked Tu Lam to be Thor, so that's who that is now, right? Like that's pretty damn cool. But it's you. I mean, they gave him a name, Daniel Shinoda or something like that. They turned him into a Japanese guy. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's
We agreed. Yeah, we agree with that. They actually wanted my name on there.
Oh,
I
they
didn't
did.
want that. Yeah.
You didn't want your name on there? Why?
No. I don't know what they're going to do with that character, and I didn't want, but Rōnin, everybody knows me as Rōnin.
That's
you
true.
know, and it's me. And for them to call him Rōnin,
It's close enough.
Yeah, that's close enough. And it's all my swords and everything. So it was great. And, we couldn't dedicate time to do the voice, just because I travel and I run a company. We're entrepreneurs. So we have a company. I was acting at that time. And then also I was traveling through the United States, and I was writing a book. So a lot going on at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Voice acting, people think it's just talking into a microphone, but it's not. It's actually acting. It's really hard. It's hard on your voice. It takes a ton of time. There's a lot of retakes. It's not always the most it's not as glamorous as doing all your moves and drawing your guns and getting hooked up to motion capture, probably. So you got the peak experience, and maybe you bowed out at the right time with the voiceover. I like the voiceover, but it's because I can't act for shit, and I have got no karate moves. I got no moves, so
No,
so
I want to talk about motion captures. They put
Yeah.
you in this really tight suit and they put these balls on you, and
Yeah.
and you got to stand in front of the computer and you got to move your arms like this, and it's calibrating your avatar on the computer.
Yeah.
So when you step out to the dome, you see this floor and it's grid squares, or it's taped in grid squares. And you look up and these huge TV monitors are all over, right, with these thousands of cameras all over you.
Yeah.
And basically when you look up in the TV, you see your avatar, and the grid squares now turn into a city or a room or a hallway or whatever, right? So then you could see the layout of the hallway, which rooms off these grid squares by looking at the screen. And then it had this time bar, right, behind me. So my avatar, I had to perform these movements right through a room, clear a room, and then come back in the hallway. But the time bar speeds up. So by the end of it, man, you're sprinting through this. And at that time I was 45, right? And, post-military. So man, it was like, I had to really work on, restructuring, my mobility, my agility again, because a lot of the movements required that. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, man. Have you played the game, or is that sort of a bridge too far?
I just have so much going on in my life that
You haven't played it. I know.
yeah, I can't justify sitting down. I can't even justify sitting down watching TV,
I know.
It's just
I know
got
the
too
feeling.
much going on.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. If you ever get like, God forbid, you find yourself with a bunch of downtime, maybe you take a vacation, maybe pick up a copy and give it a shot. It's going to be, it'll be kind of ironic if that's the one thing that you never sort of conquer is your own Call of Duty from 2020 or whatever it came out.
But what I want to say about Call of Duty, man, that's global. That's
Oh yeah,
international. That's global. That's around the world. So when I travel, it's great because they scan, my character to T. It's really weird when people play my character for a long time. They go to one of my classes or meet me. They're just kind of taken back, because it's so, so close.
do people recognize you from that, or is that not really? Because 2020 graphics, it would be kind of weird to be like, are you the Asian guy from that one video game?
So a lot of people recognize me,
Really?
but a lot of people, what I know is they're afraid to come up to me
Yeah.
because they don't want to be that guy that says, "Are you this?" And
Yeah.
they don't want to say all Asians look alike, right? So
Right.
they
Yeah.
don't
You
want to
have
be
to.
that guy.
Yep, that's true. Because I was going to say, people come up to me all the time, but it wouldn't, nobody says all white people look alike. So it's not, they're not going to run into that when you're like, no, why would you think I'm that? Oh, I get it. All Asian people look alike. And now they're in trouble with you, this tattooed out 205-pound Asian dude. And it's like, you know what? Maybe I'll just take a photo on my phone and send it to my friends and say that I think that might be the guy. Yeah, it's amazing, man. You've come full circle, right? Because you grew up loving Storm Shadow from G.I. Joe. I think you
Yes.
mentioned that earlier. I loved G.I. Joe growing up as well.
Yeah.
And I actually liked Cobra Commander. I know he's a bad guy, but whatever. I don't care. And I liked Shockwave. But you know what? My favorite was actually your nemesis, Snake Eyes. That was my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything ninja back then, or Green Beret, I was all about. So. It's crazy, right? Because the ninjas were formed out of feudal period Japan during war-stating period Japan, and shoguns like Takagawa would employ their covert agents, which were shinobis, ninjas, and these ninjas will conduct reconnaissance and they'll do direct action and hostage rescue. They have done those type of missions, assassinations. And it's just crazy that the special forces, their mission kind of mirrored that.
Is there a specific mission that you went on that stays with you in a positive way? Like when you, like maybe that hostage rescue, for example, there's another mission you mentioned in the book where you were working in Chad. I don't know if that's something that stuck with you or if it's just something you could talk about because it's declassified. I'm curious.
Any type of mission that I can get out to the locals and the indigenous people where I can provide aid, where I can help. So before the war, I was 21 years old, and we pushed into the country of Laos. So during Laos, so bordering, Vietnam, Cambodia, during that area of Vietnam War, Americans have dropped hundreds and thousands of landmines in these countries. And these, fast forward at 1998, these kids were getting their legs and limbs blown up playing in these jungles and rice paddies. So the special forces, we went in these remote villages to link up with the indigenous people to find these landmines, to locate them, to mark the fields, to show them how to properly find, mark, and dispose of these landmines. And at that same time, there was no school for the children in the village. So our engineer built a school for the children, and we explosively rerouted a nearby river so they could have running water. Those type of missions where I could help people supersedes any direct action killing, any mission that harms others, but yeah, that was one of my favorite missions, helping.
What's next for you? You could join the Peace Corps if you really enjoy that kind of thing.
I think what's next for me, I'm more into warrior's path. So what's
Yeah.
next for me is in November, we're going to Thailand. We're linking up with the special forces in Thailand. We're doing meet and greets with their federal agents because of the book release. So we're traveling, training counter narcotics teams in Baton Rouge. We're running with the SWAT guys, in Atlanta. So yeah, that's more my path these days. And also in between, I'm a public speaker these days. So I public speak. Public speak at high schools to try to instill discipline, some kind of moral code to our youth, because I can reach out to them because I'm a Call of Duty character, right? So they want to listen to me, But if I can, have their attention for maybe that 15 minutes because I'm a Call of Duty character, then maybe I can tell them about, their insecurities and how to solve their insecurities or face the struggles and, live by a set of moral values in life.
I hope you get to speak for more than 15 minutes. I hope they give you more than 15 minutes. I think your whole story is just fascinating. And thank you, by the way, for doing this on the 4th of July, man. It's the most American thing ever. I've been honored to talk with you today. And also, I had to have you back in a second, man. You have so many stories we didn't get to, many of which are in the book, which we'll link up in the show notes. And I just want to say thanks again to you. And thanks to Ruthie for getting this all squared away, because I know she's got her work cut out for you, planning all this stuff and making sure that you still have time for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.